Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's information session, Enabling Collaboration in Complex Research Environments. My name is Kerry and I am from the AAF and I will be hosting today's session. Before we go any further, I'd like to acknowledge country. In the spirit of reconciliation, the Australian Access Federation acknowledges the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea and community. We pay our respects to elders past, present and future and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders peoples today. I'd also personally like to acknowledge the Kaurna people from where I am based on the Adelaide Plains. In today's session, we will explore one of the greatest challenges researchers, industry and the community find, which is the ability to access services and data in dynamic, collaborative research environments. Streamlining managed access to services, data and compute is crucial for driving collaboration, new knowledge and industry engagement at an ever faster pace. And in today's session, we will discuss how the AF uses single sign-on to enable collaboration in such environments. And now I'd like to introduce you to our speakers for today. Sarah Nisbet, Head of eResearch at the Australian Access Federation, and Dr. Scott Koranda, our visiting expert and CILogon Senior Research Scientist at the National Centre for Supercomputing Applications at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. The AF has a long history of partnering with CILogon, and this technology solution has been used in a variety of projects connecting people to services. In terms of housekeeping, we are recording this session, which will be made available online. And if you have any questions throughout the session, please put them in the Q&A section and we will discuss them at the end. If we don't answer all questions today, we will be in contact with you after the session. Now, I'd like to hand over to Sarah Nisbet, who will discuss how the AAF implements a range of technologies to support seamless and secure access and how this supports national and international trust and identity efforts. Thank you, Sarah.
Wonderful. Thank you. Yuma, I'd like to start by acknowledging the Ngunnawal people whose land I present to you from today. I pay my respects to their elders past and present, and I extend that respect to all First Nations people here today. As Kerry mentioned, I am indeed Sarah Nisbet. I'm the Head of eResearch at the Australian Access Federation. And today I'm going to be talking about our new research infrastructure capability, trust and identity, and how it's helping researchers to gain seamless access to local and international research infrastructures. So the AAF is a member-based not-for-profit that provides our subscribers with a single sign-on service. The AAF solves the problem of users needing a different username and password for individual services by providing secure federated login. And this makes it easy for users to access hundreds of services with just one credential. So the AAF is sector owned and has been operating for over 13 years. So we are transforming Australia's research, teaching and learning communities by delivering innovative solutions that provide secure access to high-value digital resources and infrastructure. And our trust and identity solutions are co-designed by a nationally engaged expert team using international best practice. So the AAF delivers three key services into the sector. We're the national operator of the sector's Trust and Identity Federation. We're the ORCID Consortium operator, which provides a unique persistent identifier to our researchers, enabling them to link it to scholarly outputs. And we are a national capability under the Australian Federal Government's Research Infrastructure Strategy, NCRIS. So the AAF connects over 103 organisations, including all of the universities and CSIRO and more. And we connect over 300 national and over 380 international teaching, learning and research services. We also enable over 4 million authentications annually. So trust and identity underpins every aspect of modern research, and our vision is to create a more researcher-centric national research infrastructure ecosystem that is connected and secure. So we're building a trust and identity framework that includes policy and technology allowing researchers to enjoy a more cohesive network of services. So through one username and password, researchers will be able to seamlessly access multiple services. Think sequencers, supercomputers, data repositories, all sharing a common understanding of a user's identity. We see a more connected future where research, industry, and government can easily collaborate, enabling new advances in research and translation. Our trust and identity strategy is underpinned by a number of strategic drivers. So the AF wants to create a more researcher-centric NRI system where users can move seamlessly between infrastructures. We will build infrastructure that supports access to the tools and services and the skills that researchers need. And we're ensuring that we're able to support global connectivity and interoperability to Australian researchers so that they can not only participate in global research projects, but lead and initiate them. We're looking to deploy trust and identity solutions in response to national challenges like food security, treatments for disease, clean energy, species conservations. They're all really good examples of where, rather than just providing the underpinning foundational technology, we want to work directly with research communities to build solutions in response to Australia's thematic challenges. We want to ensure that all of the solutions support cybersecurity best practice, and we don't want to lose sight of the long-term sustainability of the trust and identity capability and its role in supporting researchers into the future. And as such, we're building decade-long partnerships. Through trust and identity, we've identified 4 main benefits to researchers, including easier access to multiple NRI for researchers, reducing the time and complexity for them to access multiple NRI services, a more safe and secure NRI system through cybersecurity best practice, better collaboration with industry, and better access to international infrastructure and collaborations. So what does this look like in practice? So in a typical user service provider relationship, each user would have a separate account for each service, and these individual services have no shared understanding of you or your data. But in a collaborative research environment, services have a shared understanding of who a user is and what the relevant permission structures are or should be. And this allows for your data to be shared between the services without the need for you to download and re-upload across these different services. Access can also be quickly changed to respond to any security incidences or as required, and users have access to all of the services that they need through a single login. So if you found this concept interesting, that's excellent, because our next speaker is going to expand on this. So now you should have a fairly good understanding of the AAF and our ambition to enable a seamless ecosystem of services for higher education, research, government, and industry. And I'm going to hand over to our visiting international expert, Dr. Scott Koranda. So he's going to talk to you about CILogon and how this tool is enabling single sign-on to collaborative research environments. And he's also going to walk us through a few case studies and some of the international exemplars that it's supporting. So thanks, Scott, and over to you.
Thank you. Let's see. I'm going to share the screen again and see if I can get my slides to, doesn't look like they want to cooperate. So how about if Emily drives those slides? Excellent. Thank you, Emily. All right, so I would like to begin today by recognizing and acknowledging that the University of Illinois system carries out its mission in its namesake state, Illinois, which includes ancestral lands of the Peoria, the Kaskaskia, the Piankashaw, the Wea, Miami, Mascoutin, Ottawa, Sauk, Masaki, Kickapoo, Potawatomi, Ojibwa, and Chickasaw nations. We have a responsibility to acknowledge these Native nations and to work with them as we move forward as a vibrant, inclusive institution. So I want to thank Sarah for that introduction, and I want to thank the AAF more broadly for providing such an excellent, solid identity foundation for research services. I am trained as an astrophysicist, and for years I operated a number of research services that consumed federated identities. And what I really like about what the AAF has done is that they've worked so closely with campuses in Australia to really provide excellent curated federated identities for faculty, staff, and students. And the AAF has done a really great job of helping campuses provide very consistent and stable profile information. And that's really helpful when you're operating a service. Those of us in the know, we call those profile details attributes. And it's really helpful when you can rely on that very consistent set of attributes coming from the campus identities. Another thing that the AAF has done is provide access to federated identities for collaborators outside of Australia. You might have heard of EduGain. That's the Federation of Federations. And it really makes collaborating with your partners around the world so much easier. And when we take this foundation, it's made it really easy to provide a straightforward integration pattern whenever you have a single research service. So if you do operate a research service, you can stand it up, you can federate with the AAF, you can expect to get this nice set of curated attributes about your users. And that works really well as long as you have a single service and you have some capabilities within that service for managing authorization, and you can do that for that single service. But nowadays, going on to the next slide, modern research workflows don't work quite the same way. So it's very typical nowadays to have a researcher who has to access some data, and that might be in multiple places. You might have a data store maybe on your campus, or maybe there's a Dataverse service stood up somewhere else that's operated by a different team. Gen3 is another popular tool these days for storing different types of genomic data. You might decide that as a researcher, you want to pull some of that data together into Jupyter Notebook, log into a Jupyter Notebook farm, and start beginning running some computations. Or perhaps it's Galaxy that you want to work with. That's another popular tool for doing data analysis. But it doesn't have to be hosted services, or I should say campus-based services. These might be cloud services that your researchers need to access. So you might need to access AWS resources so you can spin up certain types of engines for doing different types of analyses, but it could also be Google Cloud. And then lastly, you might need to access high performance computing resources to analyze your data set. And you might want to just use command line tools like SSH to log in. And if you have multiple services like this, then the challenge is that each of these services has to be able to consume those federated identities, those nice curated identities that the AAF has helped to organize and provide. And each individual service has to be capable of consuming them and managing them. And when these services are operated by different entities, that can be a real challenge. What you're really looking for is centralized policy management. You're looking for the ability to control authorization centrally across all of those services from the research collaboration perspective. If you help to operate a research collaboration, then you want to be able to say to your users that we can manage and provision authorization for you to all the services that you're going to need during the course of your research. And in order to do that, you need to be able to onboard users and offboard them when they're no longer part of your research collaboration. And you really want full centralized control over that user lifecycle. The other thing you're looking for when you have multiple services like this is you really want flexible service integration patterns. Again, nowadays, there's so many different types of services that researchers need to be able to access. You really need to be able to meet the services where they are when you're trying to integrate their identity management and provide those types of controls. And then lastly, the other thing you're looking for are normalizations across identity federations. So the AAF, as I keep mentioning, have done just an excellent job helping to really normalize the campus identities. But if you start collaborating with people outside of Australia, worldwide, you'll find that's not quite true for all identity federations. And the set of profile information that you might get from a campus in the United States or in Japan or somewhere in Europe can be really different. And so it helps to have a centralized tool set that can help to normalize across all those different identities. So I help to operate a service called CILogon. It's identity and access management for research collaborations, and that's what we do. We help to take those campus identities and we layer on top of them a researcher profile. And we do that by adding things like groups and roles and privileges to the campus identity to help create this researcher profile. We can also add on top of that identifiers. Sometimes you need extra identifiers because certain applications have certain requirements on the way we identify the users. And I should also point out that we don't absolutely need a campus identity to start with to build this researcher profile, because sometimes you will have users that don't have access to a campus federated identity. So we can also work with social identities. We can bring those in. ORCID is a really popular way for users who don't otherwise have a federated identity to get to infrastructure. And we can also support bespoke government integrations and also commercial integrations. So if you have researchers that are coming from government or commercial entities, and they do have login servers, we can federate with those. Once we have this researcher profile, then what we do is we actually federate the services with our CILogon infrastructure directly, and that allows us to provide this managed, curated researcher profile in a consistent way across all of your services and really give you the centralized control that you need to manage a complex research environment for your collaborators. So again, the CILogon project is operated by the National Center for Supercomputing Applications, or NCSA, at the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign. We've been doing this for more than 10 years, and we work only with federated identities. So we do not actually create or mint any identities. We don't create logins or passwords. We take the federated identities that users, your researchers, have access to, and we manage those, or we help you manage those. We do that based on standard protocols. So if you're in the know, you'll recognize some of this buzzwords. We can integrate and federate with SAML-based services, OpenID Connect or OIDC services, services that directly consume OAuth or OAuth 2. We can assert JSON web tokens, JWTs. We can integrate through an LDAP directory. We can provide access to command line tools, including SSH. So lots of different ways for services to be integrated. We have more than 20,000 active users from 500 different organizations around the world. And again, we provide this onboarding, offboarding capability so that you can manage your researchers, their attributes, their groups, roles, privileges, and do that consistently across all the services. The way that we do this is we have three primary components. The first one is called OA4MP, which stands for OAuth for many people. That's our centralized OAuth 2 server. And you'll see it on the right, sitting in the middle. That middle box represents the hosted services that CILogon provides. The second part of our stack is an authentication proxy that allows us to consume the federated assertions from the upstream providers, whether they're campus providers in Australia or Edugain, ORCID, Google, GitHub, Microsoft. It's up to the research collaboration to decide which of those federated identities they want to consume. We do that using the Shibboleth service provider. That's how we consume those upstream authentication assertions. And then the third part of our stack is an identity registry called co-managed registry. And what makes co-managed a little bit special is that this is an identity registry that was created specifically for managing federated identities. Identity registries have been around for a long time, but co-managed was developed just to manage federated identities. So again, it has no notion of how to create a login and a password, and that's because what it does is it manages by consuming the federated identity and then adding extra profile information that makes sense from the research perspective. And then lastly, we integrate with all the services. Now, that software stack that we have and that architecture that we have is not something that's bespoke. It's not something that we invented. We've been part of this federated identity community for a long time, and we've been working with collaborators like the AAF for a very long time. And about 5 to 7 years ago, what happened was there was a project led from the EU called ARC, Authentication Authorization for Research and Collaboration. And what that project did is they went around the world and they started talking to all the people that managed this type of infrastructure that allows researchers to have this centralized access and management of services. And they realized that it was really the same pattern repeated over and over again. And so they named this the ARC Blueprint. And this ARC Blueprint architecture you'll find repeated over and over again. And that's what CILogon implements. And one of the nice details about that is because of that, you sort of have built-in interoperability. You know that if you're building infrastructure based on this architecture, if you want to interoperate with services run in an architecture in North America or in Europe or elsewhere in Asia, you're going to find that interoperability is a lot easier because everyone's using the same approach to manage these researcher profiles. We also work with the REFEDS project and also CERFI. REFEDS is the Research and Education Federations, and we work with them to make sure that we understand the assurance level for the attributes and profile information coming from the campuses, and then we can pass that information on to downstream services. And Certify is a fun effort. That's the Security Incident Response Trust Framework for security incident response in a federated environment. Federated environments are different than enterprise environments, and so you need to take a different approach to security. And we were part of the development of this framework, and we've been actively involved with it for a number of years. I wanted to just show 2 quick examples of resources or collaborations in the United States that are leveraging our infrastructure. The first one is Access. Access is a program established by the National Science Foundation in the US for providing access to high-performance computing resources in the US. So if you are a researcher in the US and you are granted through an allocations process access to HPC resources that the National Science Foundation funds, then you use Access to gain access to those resources. And those of you who might come from an HPC background, the Access program previously was Exceed. And if you've really been around for a while, like I have, then before Exceed, it was TeraGrid. And when Exceed pivoted to Access, that's when they decided to fully embrace federated identity, and they decided to use CILogon as the backbone of their identity management infrastructure. And it's been really effective. We were able to make that transition literally in 1 month. And a couple of the impacts we've seen is that, first of all, the service providers, because it's not just HPC login access through SSH that's provided. There's all types of portals and other tooling based on HPC resources that are provided and managed through the Access program. And those service providers are able to log into co-managed registry, and they can create the necessary OpenID Connect client details so that they can integrate their service. They're delegated access to use the self-service portal, and they can integrate their service with just a few clicks. And we've literally seen services come online in a matter of minutes and be available to users. And that's really been fun to watch. The other nice impact is because of the use of federated identity, there's been a reduction in the number of help desk tickets for things like profile management and password reset or recovery. And the reason for that is simple. When you are relying on federated identities from the upstream campuses, then users are typically very good about managing those identities. They're less likely to forget their password or need a reset. And when they do, they can go to their campus and do that. And so it's a nice distributed way to distribute that load of managing users. The other example I want to talk about is another project funded by the National Science Foundation. It's called Cloud Bank. And Cloud Bank provides managed services to simplify cloud access for research and application. So in the US, again, for the National Science Foundation, there are certain programs that you can apply to, and if you win an award, you win a grant, then you are gifted as part of that grant a number of free, as in money, hours that you can use on various commercial cloud resources. AWS, Google, Oracle Cloud, IBM Cloud, they support a wide range. And the way that that's actually managed then is through Cloud Bank. And Cloud Bank relies on CILogon. You can see that, login with CILogon, for its identity management backplane. And so after the user receives their notification that they've won an award, they can go to Cloud Bank, they can log in with their campus credential, they can decide how they want to distribute that award across different cloud access, different cloud providers. And then they can log in directly to the consoles, whether it's AWS or GPC at Google, Oracle, whatever. Again, they just use those federated identities to actually go right into the cloud consoles, which is very nice. And so what we've seen as impacts is that those cloud accounts can be provisioned very quickly. And it allows the researchers just to get access. They don't need to wait on some central IT program somewhere to mint new logins and passwords. And the other thing that's really nice is they're able to easily share access with their collaborators across institutions. So even though the people on your award might come from multiple institutions, they can all get access to the same console space in the cloud and then be part of that same team. And it's really streamlined. So in Australia, we have been collaborating, as I mentioned, for more than 10 years with the team. We've been working in these international spaces, ReFeds, EduGain. I've met the AAF team years ago and started working with them right away on helping to evolve this global infrastructure and lay that foundation that Sarah talked about. But then a little over 3 years ago, we decided to take it to the next level. And we decided we wanted to bring CILogon services to Australian research environments. So we started a project to do that. And initially, we leveraged the existing services that CILogon operates in the United States. We're an AWS shop, so we run out of Ohio and US East 2. But we knew that in order for the right user experience, we wanted to have CILogon services hosted in Australia. And I'm very happy to report that in early 2023, we made that happen. We took our services in Sydney live and in production in early 2023. And that was really exciting for us. And the real benefit of that, of course, is that all those profiles that we help manage, all that PII, that personally identifiable information about users that you really want to do a good job managing and keeping safe, and all the log files about how they access different services at different times. All that information now stays in Australia because we're operating out of Sydney. So that's a really nice benefit. Quick note on our engagement methodology. When we begin to work with a research project, the first thing we do is we make sure we leverage all of the existing AAF expertise and professionals like Sarah and her team. These are the people you guys have been working with for a long time. You have a great trust relationship with them. They know your needs, your user stories and requirements. So we'll definitely be working with the AAF team to understand your existing infrastructure and your existing services, and then help design transitions from what may be your existing identity management tooling to a more centralized approach. It does happen sometimes that we'll be invited in at the very beginning of a research collaboration. Maybe you just receive a new award and you're spinning up a collaboration. That's really fun because it's always fun to design in a greenfield environment. But most often that's not what happens. Most often we're brought into an existing environment. You already have a active research collaboration going on with a number of users and a number of services. And we need to design a transition so that you can benefit from the centralized approach, but you need to do that in a way that's controlled because you can't stop doing your research. You have your grant money, you have to keep going. We can't just stop your world so that we can transition your users. So what we usually like to do is work through a number of proof of concept and Pathfinder projects to really help us understand in detail the requirements. We provide development and testing service tiers. And so we will work with you to test integrations before we actually move you into production and transition you to highly available production services. All of our services in Sydney are highly available. We operate them 24/7 by 365. Before I'm done, I wanted to talk about, I've got two quick slides on what we see for the future, sort of forward-looking for research collaboration, identity, and access management. The first thing we see happening, and it's happening right now, is that more mature organizations who've been using these centralized approaches for a while are transitioning to something we call federated authorization for distributed scientific computing using JSON web tokens. JSON is JavaScript object notation, and these web tokens are JWTs. These are just digitally signed bundles of assertions or capabilities or privileges about the user. And usually these JWTs just carry that information about what the user is allowed to do and doesn't actually carry identity information. It asserts what the user is authorized to do rather than asserting profile information and then having the service have to make that decision on authorization. And the reason that projects are moving this way is that it allows them to push around these tokens and not have to actually push around that profile information, because the services frankly usually don't need or don't care who the actual user is. They just want the upstream policy decision point to tell them, yes, this user is allowed to access this resource or access this data. And we see three communities that have moved on this first that we work with. The first one is an astrophysics project called LIGO. That's the Laser Interferometer Gravitational Wave Observatory. There are a number of LIGO collaborators in Australia, and they use JWTs, which they call CILogon. So that's their brand for these JWTs. The second community we work with is out of the Fermi National Laboratory in the US. They primarily do particle physics, and they call their tokens WLCG. I think that's a name only the particle physicists can love, but that's the name they've chosen, their brand for their tokens. And then the third community we're working with is actually in Australia. We've been working for a while with the AAF, with the Australian Biocommons, and they are planning a future where they assert these tokens, which are called GA for GH passports. GA for GH is the Global Alliance for Genomics and Health. And that community, which is a worldwide community, has designed a JWT profile called passports. And so we've been working with the Australian Biocommons, doing some proof of concepts around that, making sure that our infrastructure is ready to assert passports to downstream services. And then the other thing I want to mention, something that we're keeping our eye on for the future, is something called verifiable credentials and researcher wallets. So you might already have an electronic wallet on your phone. Maybe you use the Google Wallet if you're an Android user. And the idea is very similar. The idea is that you will have verifiable credentials and other information about you as a researcher that you will store, maybe not on your phone, but maybe, in something called a researcher wallet. And the way this would work is you as a researcher would go to your identity provider and you would prove who you are, you would authenticate. And then instead of taking that assertion about who you are and sending it to the centralized infrastructure, the campus login server would drop that into your wallet. And then you as the researcher have fine-grained control over that. You can take your wallet when you're ready to the centralized infrastructure, like CILogon, and you can say, here's my wallet. It has some identity in it to prove who I am. And based on that, I'd like you to give me some more verifiable credentials that carry information about the services and data that I'm allowed to have access to. And so the centralized service can do that, can drop those verified credentials into your wallet. And then you can take that wallet around to various services and you can say, I want access to your service and to your data. Here's my wallet. You can inspect it and you can pull out the verifiable credentials that make sense for you or to which you as a service have access. That way the service only needs to consume the information that it needs to actually grant you authorized access. So we are watching this develop. There's a lot of work going on, and we attend a number of meetings where everybody talks about wallets, and wallets. It's a very popular topic. And we're waiting to see how this evolves. I just saw a demo last week of a new researcher wallet technology. And to be honest, it's a little rough. I'm not ready yet to try to get my fellow researchers to use it. So we're hoping for some more improvements in usability. But we'll be watching this space and helping our collaborators understand when it's ready for them to begin trying to leverage this approach. So that's what I had for today. So I think I will turn it back to Carrie. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Scott. That was really interesting. And thank you, Sarah, as well. Scott, there was just some really interesting use cases provided today in the application of CILogon, particularly in an international context, and just what the future looks like as well. Now I'd like to open to the floor for questions. If you have any questions, please put it in the Q&A section, and we can just go through those. So one of the questions that we actually do have is a question in regards to impact tracking. So what kind of data can we see when we're using this technology? Can you see how many people are being authenticated and how long they use the services?
Yes, we can, because we operate the centralized infrastructure and because the authentication flows do flow through our services. We have access to all the information so that we can understand, which sets of your users are accessing which different services and how often. Because it is a best practice, of course, to limit the lifetime of these assertions for security reasons. So typically, we're not granting, lifetimes on these assertions that are very, very long. The default happens to be 4 hours. That's a customizable default. But because of that, we do see the daily patterns of the users as they're using your services. And so we can help provide information on reporting so that you can understand, what it looks like for your research community.
Thanks, Scott. We've had another question as well, and thank you for this talk. It was very informative. I'm going to read this out. I'm wondering if you can comment on how an AAF-hosted CILogon and/or other system might support researchers who are not associated with the AAF subscribing institution, e.g. researchers from a government research entity who are numerous in the fields of agriculture, biodiversity and health. It was mentioned that CILogon can support individuals from entities who may have their own AI credentialing system, but I'm guessing that this would need to be set up for each entity and would have a significant overhead. There may only be 1 or 2 researchers from these entities requiring access to these services in an occasional fashion. So getting this on the radar at a whole of entity level might be difficult. And then at the end, it's talking about how can enabling access for users from non-AF subscribers to national computational services be scaled in an efficient manner? So there's probably 2 parts there.
Yeah, great question. I'm sorry.
You want me to just jump off with a sort of like an AAF response to that? So as I kind of mentioned in my talk, we are the NCRIS's newest facility, and one of our goals of the capability is to look at options for extending the federation beyond the universities and CSIRO and a few government sectors and quite a lot of medical research institutes. So CILogon is obviously one of these options, and we're working with Scott to understand how that can provide value to different research groups around the country. But of course, we're looking at how we can solve this from a more holistic perspective. But, to understand how we can add the best value to do that, we really need to work with you to understand who it is that you're wanting to gain access to, and what the best solution for your research project actually looks like. So that's, 2 of probably the biggest priorities for the capability right now is to look at options for how we can extend the federation so that we don't have these significant overheads for us and for you. But a big part of that is, working through sort of exemplar projects and understanding like what's the best way to do that. But I'll hand over to Scott to kind of maybe talk through how CILogon can handle that.
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. Absolutely, the scalability is important and lots of work going on. As Sarah mentioned, that I've been watching over the past couple months as I've been in Brisbane. So that's really fun to see. As for the CILogon perspective, we again are operating using standard protocols. And so what we're trying to do is make sure that we have that foundation so that as bridges might be being designed and built with government or commercial entities, that we're prepared for those integrations. So we're continuing to do that. And part of getting ready for that is practicing by using the bespoke integrations. And so we have already had instances in Australia where working with one of our communities, they came to us and said, we have this other campus. Actually, it's not a campus, it's a research center that we'd really like users to be able to use the infrastructure. And so we were able to federate with them fairly quickly, again, since these are based on very common protocols, SAML and OpenID Connect. So it's a fairly straightforward process. But yes, of course, we want to make sure that we do approach it in a scalable way, as Sarah mentioned.
Okay, thank you, Scott and Sarah, for answering those two parts. We have another question here, also from Tim from the APF. Thank you. He says, thanks for the great presentation. This is all very exciting and interesting. Thank you. And an emerging issue that we are finding is providing access to traditional owners so they can manage their cultural data. This is particularly an issue when individuals may not have much technical background. Is there a better way to do this than requiring individuals who have a social login like Google, etc.?
I'll take that at a technical level to begin with. Yes, and we definitely understand this issue. We have been working in Australia with the Language Data Commons of Australia, LDACA, and they've helped us to understand some of these issues. And we have been working on a couple of different approaches driven by their use case to make it easier to build up this type of community when there are users who don't have access to traditional campus credentials, and social providers cannot be the best solution, and so you don't want to rely on that. So we've been working on new types of onboarding because the onboarding, the collection of your researchers into the infrastructure is going to be different for those types of communities than they are going to be for a group of particle physicists or astrophysicists. So we're paying attention to how we can design different onboarding approaches where the idea of a community is a little bit more nebulous, and where you want to meet the user for the first time in a very friendly way and begin to help them access your infrastructure while at the same time preparing for more managed access to other resources, other data that does require a bit more authorization and control. And the problem of not having federated identities is a real continuing issue in the community. But I'm very excited because the AAF is definitely aware of this issue, and we've been working together on a number of ideas about how to move forward. I call this the identity provider of last resort problem, which is not a very attractive name, but that's how we refer to it in the community. And there's a lot of work going on driven by these types of use cases. And so I'm hoping that there'll be some very interesting progress coming very soon.
Okay, thank you, Scott.
I think Scott answered that really well, but I'd just say, Tim, I'm more than happy to have a chat with you after this call just to understand your requirements a bit more, in a bit more detail. That sounds like a really interesting opportunity that we'd love to explore more, and yeah, talk to you about what we're doing with LDACA.
Thank you, Sarah and Scott. Another question is around how do we manage the approvals of access? And there's also another part around multi-factor authentication.
So let me take the approval first. The tooling that we use for managing the users, again, is that identity registry called CoManage, and we can support a number of different types of authorization management. And it really depends on use cases for the research collaboration. So you might have resources that don't really require authorization. You just need to know that it's someone who authenticated maybe from a particular set of campuses. And so that's something that we can configure as a policy and enable so that those users just streamline into your services. On the other ends of the spectrum, we have things like delegated management of the actual authorization decisions. So you can manage your organization inside of CoManage registry with various levels. And then you can delegate the authorization decisions down to the various teams that might be part of your research collaboration. And so then each team can be responsible for managing who's onboarded, how are they onboarded, when will they be offboarded, and which services and data do they have actual access to. So we do have a full spectrum of capabilities around managing that authorization, and we can express that down to the services in a lot of different ways. Groups are a common first approach. A lot of organizations like to think in terms of authorization based on groups. But we can also do it with roles. We can manage individual permissions and map groups and roles onto permissions. So we have a lot of flexibility, and we can usually find a way to map onto your organization's actual policy. And frankly, to be honest, a lot of the organizations we work with, the toughest part is for the organization to actually put the policy down on paper, so to speak. And that's because once you try to transition to this centralized model, you often have to really focus on what is our authorization policy, and it might not have been written down before. It might have been very organic as you added users and services to your research collaboration. And then the second part of that was multi-factor authentication. So CILogon does pass through the multi-factor authentication information that comes from the upstream login server. So if a campus has implemented multi-factor and it's used and they signal that to us, we will signal that to the downstream services so that the downstream services can make a decision on whether or not they're going to allow the user. You might require multi-factor for access to your resources, and we can enable that. We do have other communities, and Access that I talked about in the US is a good example. They do require multi-factor, but they know that not all of their campuses that their users come from provide it. And so they have a step-up multi-factor approach so that they can also have a centralized approach. And we help them manage that. We don't provide that service directly. They use a tool in the US called Duo, and we help to manage the Duo access. That's part of the centralized approach, so that they can make sure that all of their users are using multi-factor to get to the service. So we do have capabilities for helping you manage that. We don't actually provide it ourselves, though. Again, we're not a repository of secrets. We help you manage your secrets.
Thanks, Scott. We've also had a question from Reese. Thank you. Great talk. I'm thinking that trust in my credentials originates with an upstream identity provider. Can you just speak to trust preservation in my downstream credentials and their use when I change employers or abandon a social infrastructure provider or possibly spend time with another identity provider?
Sure. I want to be respectful of time, so I'll do this one a little quicker. We do support if a collaboration wants it. It's not a requirement, but if the collaboration wants identity linking, we do support that. So when we build this researcher profile, and you may start with a particular campus, where you're first onboarded. We do support linking extra identities to that, including social identities if the collaboration wants that. And so a very typical pattern we see is graduate student onboards, they get their degree, they're going to do a postdoc at a different institution. It's helpful if the institutions, if their credentials overlap, so they can go to the next institution, and then we can link that identity before the first one expires. But sometimes it doesn't, and so we can use social identity as that bridge. And in the case where there really is no bridge, you might leave the field for a year and then come back. That's okay, because we preserve that profile information unless the collaboration doesn't want us to, but typically we would change that from an active to an expired state, but it's saved and we can reactivate that profile with input from the research collaboration, and we can rebind a federated identity later on if that user returns to the collaboration. So we do have some tooling to help with identity linking.
Thank you, Scott. Yes, we're coming up to the hour and we are keeping to time today. Just like to thank everyone involved. Sarah and Scott, thank you for presenting today. It was very interesting. And thank you to everyone who's posted questions. I think that's generated some really interesting discussion. I'm sure we'll be in contact to discuss this a little further at some point. If you have any questions or like to reach out to us, please do, and we will hopefully speak with you all soon. Wonderful. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks for attending.